All right. Welcome to another Sunday Superversive live stream. I'm your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and I'm here with my co host, Anthony Marquetta, and with our guest tonight, uh, Tooky's Mag. How are you doing today, Tookie?
All good. You can just call me David. Thank you so
Ah,
much for having me on, guys. It's a real pleasure.
it is our pleasure to talk with fellow travelers and all that good stuff. Today we're going to be talking about young adult literature, YA, uh, right wing YA, basically anything to move it a tick away from the cesspit that YA is right now, and has been for quite some time, quite frankly. But everyone has opinions, everyone has special hatreds, uh, but I think we all agree that something needs to change.
Mhm.
Yep.
Mm. So,
And
I understand that, David, you had a stream about it recently. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that in your channel?
y- yeah. So we had it, and it's actually uploaded now as a cleaned up version because we are terrible at streaming. So it was our first attempt at one. If you go to our YouTube channel, you can find the recording of it. It's the second most recent video. It's titled "Right Wing Young Adult Fiction" with a picture of Jack Harry Potter on the front of it. So it all started from Last
Base.
Things. Yeah, I think the cover. I think the thumbnail is good bait to get people to click. Hopefully, it's actually our best performing video of everything we've done
Nice.
so far. Believe it or not, not which is not saying a lot because we don't get crazy views. We do talk about books mostly,
Mm.
but it started from Twitter, which usually we try to keep Twitter at arm's length to some extent, but Last Things you guys may be familiar with. He does a lot of movie like essays, and he does videos on films. Did like a film show sort of review. Anyway, he threw out a Twitter thread that said what the world needs now more than anything is right wing young adult fiction. I did like a Twitter thread on it, and he confessed to me in a chat when I reached out to him that it was based on he fired out on the toilet with very little thought, and it just got crazy responses from people. Which I think, like you guys, I heard this concept, and a lot of people, it triggered something in my brain where I'm like, there was like a visceral reaction, like there we do need something like this. Um, and he went on in his thread to talk about some of the things that would define it. Maybe sort of the uber leftist non-binary person would be portrayed like more negatively, or
Mm.
more traditional masculine role would be portrayed more positively. One thing that really triggered a lot of people was he said the female love interest would be defined just by her beauty and nothing else. That he drew the line there. And he had, on our episode, and I think Ben, you had hopped on around then. He was saying, some of that was just Twitter snark, but he
Yeah.
felt very deeply that there was something missing. And we had, I guess, a range of topics. I don't know how deep you like me to go, but just I guess at a high level, the way I conceptualized it, there one, it was sort of talking about the state of young adult fiction as it is, and sort of since Harry Potter, there's sort of this strange genre that's grown up, and now it's pushed and it's everywhere, and it's very lib coded, and it's kind of shifted out of being set for the same age as well. Like it's for a broader age range, it's very political. That was the first question, and the second really interesting part that we spoke a lot about was, what do we do about it? Like what's a healthy response, what's a realistic um course of action we can take to maybe get some results as people that see the issues with this. And so I guess I'd love to hear your guys thoughts, I guess, just from that summary, of what are those two, I guess, interested you all the most.
So I want to clarify here. When he said that a love interest should be defined by her beauty and nothing else, was that a troll or serious?
I think it was a troll, but he stood by it in our talk, actually, the more we talked about it, because he wanted his idea was, and as we talked to him more, when he said YA, what he was really thinking about was fiction for young men. or teens, early preteens. Yeah, so I don't know if that clarifies it, but that he so the female, the beauty, her being a symbol of pure beauty and all that, to him, the way he described it in the conversation was it was important, so that the story was centered on the male protagonist, his point of view, his battles. And I made a reference actually in that conversation to more classic literature, like Beowulf or Gilgamesh or something.
Mm.
And often those stories start with a man who's strong, and females there are just beautiful when it's a male focused story. And he starts strong and he stays strong, whereas in the modern view it's always more complicated relationships with women,
Mm.
which I'm not saying is a bad thing, but it was just a trend that we noted, and I think that was what he was kind of instinctively getting at with the simple but beautiful females.
Well, it's like, there's a difference between like how Deja Thoris is usually portrayed in any other media, but then in the original media, she's actually kind of happy to be rescued by John Carter all the time. Poor girl goes through a lot. She doesn't need this complicated lifestyle of also having to be an action heroine. I'm sure. I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's how I kind of interpreted it as, because you know it's
Yeah,
bad
because I'm
writing to
thinking this,
have a one note character.
I'm
It's
thinking this over, and I'm trying to figure out whether or not I agree. Right? Like, and if I don't agree, how much of that is just like crack nonsense, and how much is no, there's something here. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Uh,
Well,
and
yeah, go for it.
I'll finish my thought first. And my thought is, okay, well, let's go back to the classics. Because one thing that, like, we mentioned John C. Wright earlier. If you don't know him, he is an author. We reference him literally constantly. It probably is annoying for our viewers. However, John C. Wright, consider him a master. He wrote a post many, many moons ago on the Bechdel test. Now, are you aware of the Bechdel test?
I am.
Okay, good. So I'm not
It's
going to explain.
for anyone listening. It's two women talking about not a man, right?
Hmm.
That's the
Right,
and
like
you pass the test if two women talk about anything that's not their
you pass the
relationship ever,
test
and
if you
then
have two women who are having a conversation about someone who is not a man. Right
Mhm.
now, John C. Wright came at it and said, my problem with the Bechdel test is that too many classic works of literature would fail it, which would illustrate. This is basically what he said. I'm paraphrasing here, right? But
Hmm.
therefore, it must not be a very good marker of like good writing, right? Uh, and I think he's fundamentally correct. Like, don't get me wrong, there are works that could or should or do pass, right? But like the Iliad would, he said basically, like, if you have a test that the Iliad would fail, the Odyssey would fail, Dante's Inferno would fail, right? Like, how useful is it in
Mhm.
judging literature in any meaningful way? Uh, okay, fine. So keeping that in mind, hearing this, your love interest should be beautiful and nothing else. My immediate thought is, well, is there a literary precedent for this? I don't know that there is. I actually would argue no, because my immediate thought was to go to, well, what's the ultimate boys' adventure story? Granted, it is not written for children, but basically every adventure story ever written after it is based on this story in some way. You probably know what I'm getting at. It's the Odyssey, right?
Mhm.
Which I'm currently reading right now. It's not to be clear, it is not young adult. I'm not claiming it is. However, every adventure story ever written is in some way owes a debt to the Odyssey. It's literally the original adventure story, right? The Odyssey actually has very three-dimensional female characters. Penelope in particular. At one point at the end of the story, Agamemnon, who is one of the spirits in the underworld that Odysseus met, right? Agamemnon basically almost all but calls Penelope the real hero of the story, right?
Mhm.
He says something along the lines of, if it weren't for Penelope, like none of this could have happened, right? Uh, so this is where I hear this and I go, is there a literary history? And my conclusion is no, I don't think you need to have a woman who's beautiful and nothing else. I think you can have personality because Penelope has a lot of personality. So does Cersei, for that matter. So Calypso, Athena has a lot of personality, right? But Penelope is the love interest, so I don't think this is a necessary component of boys.
I would actually agree with that. I brought it up because it was one, it was a little bit funny, but then
It
two,
is.
it was one of his like 4 or 5 like sub points he made that I thought was interesting, and to me, I interpret it, again with the Twitter snark removed, it's more like the focus is on the complexity and the adventure and the thoughts of the male character, the male point of view, and he's exaggerated to the point where like the woman is like literally stripped of her humanity besides being pretty. But I think in reality, I agree with you. And like with the Odyssey, like a component of his wife and wanting to be his wife is that she's like chaste and she has strong values. And so I definitely agree with you that is that it can be overstated in the Twitter version of it. That sub point, and I would not say that's a high part of it.
The grain of truth here is that the focus needs to be on the male character, right? Because it's a boy's adventure story.
Yeah.
That's the whole point, right? But the flip side of this, though, is that I think you got to be like, boys don't just. I know that this is going to sound like I promise I'm not trying to be too left here. But boys really don't just want beauty, right? Like, boys do want beauty, but especially when you're reading a book, which is not a visual medium anyway, right? There needs to be something valuable about the person who you're fighting for, that I think should go beyond just being pretty.
The virtues must be there along with.
Yeah, exactly. I'm thinking too, John C. Wright again. The name's gonna come up. In Green Knight Squire, which is his young adult book, the main character has a female love interest in the book, and he gives her personality, right? Like, she has, and she's very desirable. If anything, she's kind of flirtatious, right? Like,
she gets his attention by showing up and sunning herself in a wetsuit while he's wrestling a bear. It's very distracting for him.
God, I wish that were me.
Fantastic. Yeah, but the point is, like, she had personality. I don't know. I don't mean to dwell on this because I'm trying to get at like the larger point as well. I don't think that this like people will sometimes do this and go, "Hey, this idiot said women should have no personality," and then they'll use it to invalidate everything that they say. I'm not trying to do that, right? I think that the larger point is correct. I also, though, here's something else I'm going to throw at you that just to spice things up.
For sure.
I'm not sure if we really need young adult as a category at all.
I brought that up in the conversation. I want to hear your take on it, but I did the exact same thought.
Okay, so here's the thing about young adult. This is an extremely new category, right? Harry Potter is sometimes called... What was that?
In our lifetimes.
Yeah. Harry Potter is sometimes referred to as young adult. This is a lie. It is not. Harry Potter is children's fiction, right?
Yeah, it starts as, and I looked this up for the conversation, it was middle grade at the start. So middle grade is defined as 8 to 12, I think. And then so 13, and then YA is like 1 year above that to 18.
So Harry Potter sort of ages itself, it sort of ages with the reader in ways that, in my opinion, actually make the story worse. Now, I say this as somebody, I was a Harry Potter, Ben was not, I was, right? I was a Harry Potter kid growing up. Right, this was my series. I was at the midnight release parties and all of that stuff. I was a big nerd, right? Mm-hmm. So as somebody who was like really, really into it, I don't think that the aging up of the series actually helped it at all, because it created logic gaps where things that you would not expect to be explained in a children's book now need to be explained because it's being treated like a young adult book.
10% less whimsy every entry, and the
Exactly.
tone shifts. I only read
The
the
big
first 4
one,
books, but I did experience that to some extent.
yeah, the big one is in book 1, right? Where they get through the traps that are meant to, the first year students get through traps that are meant to hold back Lord Voldemort. And then Dumbledore, and then like they go, wait a minute, why does Dumbledore let us go through? And Harry says something along the lines of, well, maybe he thought we need to experience it ourselves or whatever. Now, from the logic of an 11-year-old, and when you're writing a children's book, this is a perfectly acceptable explanation that doesn't really need any elaboration. You could assume Dumbledore's behind the scenes watching this all along. Yeah, you wouldn't really expect the children to be able to get past these traps, but it is for children. So you want the protagonist to be able to. Now, when you look at it from the perspective of the 17-year-olds, they're the protagonists of the last book, right? And it's now being written as a young adult series, and Dumbledore's actions are being looked at under a microscope. Like, this is actually a major plot point in the final book, that Dumbledore is being seriously questioned by the characters. You're kind of forced to look back at that in book 1 and go, what the hell was going on there? Like, how did they have, how were these supposedly the most advanced magical defenses in the world able to be bypassed by first year students? Right?
Anthony,
Like,
Anthony, don't you know that St. Clorthos, the St. Louis inner city magical school, has one of the highest rates of wizard on wizard homicide in the country? Listen, these kids bring through silent swans all the time. Like, you don't even, Anthony, you have to understand.
have you ever seen the Snape ogres meme where he goes, what percent of or I think it was, which race has the higher IQ, elves or ogres? And Hermione said, and they go, Hermione, actually, sir, IQ is a pseudoscience. And then Snape goes, incorrect, 10 points from Gryffindor. Malfoy, and then he goes, elves, sir, correct. And then they go, what percentage of ogres are responsible for crime? And then before he could finish, Draco goes, 50, sir, correct, 20 points to Slytherin. Uh, it's amazing. Uh, Also amazing, by the way, is if you've ever seen the map of wizard schools that J.K. Rowling put out, it is one of the funniest things I have ever seen. Like, I have never seen a stupider map in my life. It's hysterical. Uh, Literally, it's like you have one school that covers the UK. That's it. And then you have a school that covers all of Africa. And they're like, yeah, these are the two schools. Then there's like the Japan school that just covers Japan. And then there is the North America school.
St.
And
Clorthos.
St. Clorthos, yes. Uh,
I love
it's
that Key
actually
and Peele sketch.
like there is a canonical name for it, but it's St. Clorthos.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really funny. But I'm sorry, I'm off topic. The reason I was bringing this up is that Harry Potter was not marketed or pushed as young adult fiction. You have books like A Series of Unfortunate Events that came out in the Harry Potter boom, also not marketed as young adult fiction. You know, this is a very recent category. Basically, before this, the categories were children's fiction, uh, which would go from young children to middle grades, and adult fiction. So I'm wondering what happened in society where we said, I think that there's something here that's about not wanting to grow up.
Yeah, I made a comment similar to this, and kind of we rushed onto something else because we had so much to cover. But when you're 16 years old, like my thought was it has something to do with our modern society's idea of education and youth and mass schooling. It creates this weird thing where like I'm supposed to, I'm 16, I should be reading books for 16-year-olds. I'm 18, I should be reading books for 18-year-olds. Rather than just like, okay, I'm approximately an adult, I should just read adult books now, or just not that all books have to be at the same level of complexity, but I agree. There's something unhealthy, and I think it shows our society is like uber commercialization, hyper focusing that the books are tailored in that way. and then the YA genre itself, as I mentioned before, has kind of drifted so that it's not even as much an age thing now in terms of like the sexual explicitness, the violence. Things are labeled YA are thrown in there that are fully explicit.
Oh yeah.
Um, yeah.
Like there's less explicit stuff than in like Princess of Mars, and everyone's running around naked. Like
Mhm.
it's crazy some of the stuff because like I read it for a while, it was there, it was in the appropriate age section, and eventually I'm like, I can't read this. It's why I don't read that much cyberpunk, even though I love it to death. They always have Neo having sex with the Trinity stand-in. It doesn't.
Mhm.
I'm not into that. It's not my thing. That leather must be getting chafy. Uh, there, like, some of the stuff was pretty good, and some of the stuff I still remember it. But now that I look back on it, it was always, uh, well, what we would call woke now. Proto SJW, this, that, equality, that, pretties and all this other stuff,
Mhm.
which was a dystopia based on personal beauty, which, let's be real, that's pretty Bronze Age.
Yeah, I just call that life, to be honest.
It's
Like,
true. There's some like nerd goth chick who refuses to see the guy in the computer chair.
that's me.
It's me.
Um,
No, that's me. And
yeah.
she's reading pretties. It's like, no.
Yeah, it's one of those. I think part of it is just sort of a marketing bloat because there's some success there, and so they just kind of lump things in there that don't necessarily belong.
Mm.
But so I guess that's kind of the former part is like the YA as a category. What is it? What's becoming? And then the second half is like, what should it be? What could it be? And I'm kind of a mixed opinion. Like we just said, maybe we just shouldn't have right-wing YA because we just shouldn't have YA. When someone turns
Mm.
16, 17, 18, it's like, just read adult books. Like, don't sweat it. Like, it's not something to be anxious and like, oh, I need to be reading this kind of book. Because my other big thing is I think reading should just always be fun.
Yep.
And a lot of times people are reading things, even on our side of things, they're like, oh, I need to be reading, Spangler, or I'm wasting my time. And it's like, dude, just read something that is like funny and roughly age appropriate and just enjoy. That's a big part of our podcast is just we're trying to bring book club joy, fun of reading to people. I feel like part of that is, and what's missing from our modern society is the ability to connect with people over books. And I guess YA actually is a bit of a bridge there because it subcategorizes or claims to subcategorize like what type of person you are and who you can share it with. Is maybe it's optimized for sharing on social media actually. And so maybe that's one of the reasons why it took off when it did and how it did is because you have a social media savvy, the first social media generation pretty much coming up, they're sharing books with each other. And so, magically, quote unquote, this category of literature appears where they're able to communicate and it's a social experience in the digital age. And now it's sort of like they've aged up, there's another generation coming up. And so now there's this weird bloat. And then because of the current society we're in, everything gets this crazy leftist coding that makes it very kind of spiritually poison. So yeah, I think that might be part of it. And part of my suggestion to quote unquote reclaim or create more like, let's just say, young adult, young male fiction, whether maybe, there's more middle grade and maybe there's more just like adult male, like Louis L'Amour of 2024. We need to, I think part of it is capturing a kind of social media zeitgeist fun, like a spirit of fun and like experiencing stuff and wanting to catch up on the latest thing. I don't know. I'm rambling a bit, but I think that's part of the puzzle of like the solution side. Cause I don't want to dump on, pink-haired women that read books that I don't think are very good. I think that's kind of fun for a minute, but it's not as productive as
We've done
trying to
it.
think of like what's the next thing. Yeah, I do it, but I try to control myself.
Yeah. And I fundamentally agree with you on that. Like part of what we're doing in the superversive movement, such as it is seeking, to rebuild things. I'm yeah, you listen to Academic Agent, right?
Sometimes I can't say I'm super up to speed on him though.
Oh, yeah, that's. But you've heard his phrase, we're children of winter, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's like, like even before I heard that phrase, I was of the belief that, quite frankly, we're in a holding pattern, and the goal of our generation should be to make sure that we have as much as possible given to the next generation. Like it seems to me most of our most successful literary events that are actually producing things
Hmm.
have been things like Vox Days, Castalia Library, DMR Books, the gentleman who reposted Spengler, which, by the way, are gathering dust on my end table. They're bigger than I thought they were, man. They're bigger.
Yeah.
But it's like a lot of it's just reviving and finding old books.
Mhm.
Um, and I've seen that like even in normies. Like I was talking to a guy who knows, I read and we enjoy it. He's a black guy and he's like, I found some black exploitation novels and they're
Jeez.
really good. And I'm like, yeah, it's like that Iceberg Slim stuff. He's like, yeah, because there was a pimp called Iceberg Slim who wrote about his event, who wrote about his life in the St. Louis, no, sorry, New York Harlem or something like that. And yeah, he wrote a novel in like the 1980s. That's a supposed autobiography, and he's like,
Mhm.
he's enjoying it. He's liking it. Like it's not. We're not. Nobody's reading the new stuff really. These books are. If they ever see, New York bestseller, most of the time they're just not. It's a trick of accounting,
Mhm.
and not
Mhm.
anything else. I know Brian Niemeyer has, broken it down. It's basically just insurance on books they bought that never sold that they then pulp and get more money from it on the, like it's like a movie studio putting out duds to get the insurance money. Um,
Mhm.
same basic idea.
Yeah, yeah. With the what is it? They rip off the covers and then they get refunded or something like that.
Yeah.
Um,
Then
yeah,
they
it's a
get
tough
pulped
shell
and they
game.
get, yeah, yeah, and it's yeah, I just view it as like, we can do new things, don't get me wrong, but it's like at some point in time, uh, I think we'll be destined to be remembered mostly for what we preserve more than, tearing down YA or something like that. Though it deserves to be teared down. YA Delindo Est.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Now go for it, sir.
No, no, I was just agreeing with Ben.
Yeah. No, I think I was just thinking on the oh, shoot. I lost my train of thought. I think essentially it was the living media aspect of it. I guess I have a concern because I do hear that a lot about our role as preserving what's come before, and I do think that's a big part of it. I just see, and this is mostly from social media, but I just see a lot of people going back to the classics. And
Hmm.
um, what I actually said in the last conversation was I just find something like very sad about not having a living culture or engaging in a living culture, which is what I feel like I'm worried we're falling into that. Uh, if so, I guess one example would be the things I see published online. And the things I see actually getting read, a lot of the time it is, rehashing the oldies, anthologies of stuff that was written in 1920.
Hmm.
And I just, especially with writing, because one of the benefits of writing is it is very cheap, right? Like
Oh
obviously
yeah.
it's a labor of love, it's time consuming for one person, but it's the cheapest thing to produce and share. And so the gap I see is just like building energy and excitement to engage with it among people that on the nonfiction side, I think they're actually doing pretty well. Like if you look at guys like Passage Publishing, like they're moving copies,
Oh
and if you look
yeah.
at guys like Royal Roads type like fantasy stuff. They're moving copies too. And so the difference being, Passage is more politically aligned with a certain ideology, whereas, these other ones are not. And I guess that's the gap that I'm wrestling with. And we didn't make any progress in the other conversation on this, by the way. I threw it out as as a concern at the end, and we didn't really have time to hash it out at all. But yeah, I just
Yeah.
see nonfiction and old stuff gets buzz, new stuff. And granted, there's a whole like editorial process that we just don't have. But I just don't see. I'm not seeing a way to generate energy around it in a super great way. I think we're kind of doing some grassroots stuff like this show, and just putting our own stuff out there. But I'm really concerned about, like, because if every book or story or whatever is a reflection of a person who's been through a place and a time, if we don't capture our place and time, then it's going to be lost, and with it the lessons of that place and time, or I don't know. There's value. I think there is value that I want to hold on to in who we are and what we're going through. It's yeah, and a case in point of that, actually. And I've talked about this before. There's no good COVID novel yet, in my opinion, and that's insane when you think about it. Granted, it takes a year or two to like write like a really great book. If you're like really gonna like go in depth on something, it's gonna take you a while. But yeah, but I mean, I think that's kind of a reflection of the issue, right
Yeah.
there. Like that's case in point. What the hell? Like that, like literally a once in a world history event occurred a few years ago, and there's some stories that cover it a little bit, but there's no great story of it. And
Yeah.
by now, I feel like World War II, World War One, they had people were talking about it,
People were
after it
making it
wrapped up.
while it was happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on these sorts of things, as we all do, I am sure. But I did a post on Right of Center Authors recently. I found 2 articles. I'll link them to you if I can find where I put them. But I found 2 articles that were about the state of the publishing industry. Right? Quite interesting stuff. So this is the takeaway that I got from it. It was really enlightening. Number 1 is that TradPub. So TradPub is referring to what we now call the Big 4 publishers.
Yeah.
I don't even know what they are, to be honest with you. Like, I know Penguin, Macmillan.
Yeah.
That's it.
And
That's
I
all
can
I
never
know.
remember the other 2 because they don't publish science fiction. So,
yeah,
okay.
but anyway, the Big 4 publishers, which is TradPub, and what people traditionally think of as publishing. So they are in free fall right now, much like every other industry, right? That's been, because they're a converged industry. So do you know the language that we use of converged and conversion? Or should
In
I
reference
give
to
a
what? I guess just give
SJW?
it. No,
Social
I've never
justice
heard it.
warrior.
I've never heard it in terms of SJW stuff. Conversion for
Interesting.
SJWs.
Okay, so this is it's a reference to social justice warrior infiltration, right?
Okay.
What we
They've
call the woke
infiltrated it.
now.
Yeah, they've infiltrated and they have converged the organization so that no longer, or the industry in this case, the whole industry, so that's no longer dedicated to doing its primary purpose, right? Its primary purpose is now to create more woke content. This is true of many, many, many different industries. Hollywood, Disney is like the prime example, of course, but Hollywood is, as a whole, as an industry, has been completely converged. And no, it was not always like this. It always had elements in it that were converged, but it was never to the level where virtually everything, right, was part of this SJW ideology.
Right.
So, woke ideology, I guess you could say, although you got to be careful because when you use woke, people immediately hear it and then they turn their brains off. But I don't know. Anyway, going into TradPub has been converged. It is no longer about making good fiction. And as a result, like all organizations that are converged, it is in free fall right now. So, what is going on in TradPub? Like, how are they surviving? Well, there was a court case where they went through this a few years ago, and the answers that came out were really enlightening. So, you have number one, celebrity book deals. You get what they do is they give a bunch of money in an advance to a celebrity. So they think, several $1,000,000, right? Uh, as an advance to pick a celebrity, any celebrity. They approach someone who's in the news cycle, right? And go, hey, want to write a book? And the celebrity will get a ghostwriter to write a book for them, and then the publishing house will put it out, right? Uh, these books are essentially 50-50. So half the time they will make bank, and half the time they will not make their money back, right? But publishing houses will do it anyway. So that's number one. Number two, children's books. And when I say children's, I mean young children. Particularly, I'm not talking about new children's books, I'm talking about old children's books, right? Dr. Seuss, Goodnight Moon, right?
Yeah,
I'll
the
Love
old
You Forever.
classics. You're always going to sell Hungry Caterpillar. You're always going
Hungry
to sell
Caterpillar,
1 million
exactly.
copies a year, forever.
So these books are big sellers. They are one of the things that prop up the company, and they never do bad, right? They will always sell. So, very important, they stay. And then finally, the third thing is just kind of incidentally new authors. So, new authors are not expected to make money. What you are doing when you sign a new author is you are essentially taking out a lottery ticket, with the odds of a lottery ticket, right? One in every 1,000 authors. I don't know. I'm making up the number, but something like equally extreme, right? Something really extreme. 1 in 1,000, 1 in 5,000 authors, will become fabulously rich and will become one of the stable of franchise authors. Oh, that was one I missed. I knew I missed something. So the franchise authors, by the way, they're the third pillar that props up publishing houses. So you have celebrity
Like
books,
Stephen
like
King.
yeah, like Stephen King, James Patterson, J.K. Rowling, for that matter. Uh, right? These franchise authors, they prop up. They're one of the three pillars that are propping them up right now. Them, children's books, and celebrity books. But celebrity books are much more hit and miss, which makes the franchise authors even more important, right? They're the only ones who are putting out new material that's actually like keeping them afloat. And then you have finally you pay the new authors, and you have this lottery ticket system. The lottery ticket is you pick an author, you publish their book. Either they go viral, right? And now and congratulations, you found one of your franchise authors. This happens less than 1% of the time, or they make no money. There is literally no in between. There's no mid list. There's no
Anymore.
Yeah, not anymore. Not in TradPub, I should say, because there's another point here that I'm gonna make. There's no mid list anymore. There's no maybe you made a little bit, but not as much as you wanted. Maybe we'll publish. No, if you're not one of their mega hit authors, then they're gonna drop you, and you will make nothing, right? The odds are you will be off the shelves within a few months. Very, very, very rarely you will find a franchise author. And this is why publishing houses really hate taking expensive risks. Like, for example, you remember Andy Weir. He wrote The Martian, right? A lot of people don't realize this, but Andy Weir was an indie self-published author, right? I actually read one of his short stories that had went viral, not realizing it was by the guy who wrote The Martian, called The Egg, which was just some like sort of pseudo philosophical babble, whatever. It didn't really matter. It was fine. But yeah, I had no idea this was written by Andy Weir, right? So he was self-publishing The Martian online, and it had about 3,000 followers on his Substack. Now, that's not that many, all things considered, right? Like, it's really a fairly small audience, but it's a big enough audience that when you put it up on Amazon, you immediately have 3,000 sales, right? And
Well,
then
it doesn't
3,000.
quite work out that way, at least for me. But yeah,
Well, what Anthony
Not,
means is you should have 3,000 sales. You will
Yeah,
have,
yeah, you will have
maybe
300,
500.
300 probably. Yeah.
yeah.
500 sale, but even 500, right? That is way more than most things get, and that pushes you to the top of the charts, and then you get
Hmm.
more, and there's a feedback effect.
Yeah.
Uh, so publishing houses saw this, and they offered Andy Weir a lot of money because he had a really big audience, right? Uh, and that's why Andy Weir became one of their franchise authors. But he wasn't really a risk. They knew he already had an audience he had built up over time, right?
Right.
Hmm.
Uh, so he was an exception. Uh, Most authors, like TradPub, is literally just not worth it for 99.99% of authors. Even if you do, by some miracle, get published, which is already incredibly difficult to do, uh, you will almost certainly not sell anything. You would need to be in the top 1% to sell. So, does that mean there is no hope? Well, people will go, what about self publishing? Self publishing is interesting. You can make money self publishing, right? It's doable. Uh, the problem is you need to write. There are a few problems, really. Two main ones. Number one is you need to write at a very fast pace, a pace most people won't write at. One novel a year is not going to cut it, right?
We're
Uh,
talking like a novel every 3 months or
yeah.
faster.
I guess one assumption I just want to examine though is you're assuming
Sure.
someone wants to live off of a career as a writer.
Oh, I agree. That's a
Yeah,
big.
Yeah.
You're
which I
right.
think is probably not a healthy or good one to make in what's essentially kind of a dying art form for the moment. I think it would come back, but I don't think I think that's a really high bar to set, is to say you have to make a full-time living
Um.
writer
Mm,
Yes and no,
to
and I'm
write.
gonna discuss that a little bit more later. Right? Like, I promise I have somewhere I'm going with this. It's not just random nonsense. Uh, but yeah, that's the number one problem is you for self-publishing, you need to write really fast. Most people, even if they could, just don't want to write that fast. It's a very exhausting way to write. Number two is you are a slave to to your audience, to the algorithm, right? Like literally you need to generally, if you're going to be really successful in self-publishing, you need to have an incredibly specific niche. I'm talking a niche of like cozy Christmas themed mysteries starring old ladies. Like that specific. And if you do anything outside of that niche, people just won't read your book. You can't deviate. You need to come up with new variations on that very specific theme. It kind of stifles creativity in art in that way. Uh, and again, unless you're one of the 1% who like hits virality, right? Which can happen, but it happens at about the same rate it happens in TradPub and for the same reasons. It's
I
not
think
going to happen. You
often with
can't
different
count
skill
on it.
sets too, because it's usually not your novel writing that is going to build you a social media following, right? Usually it's
mhm.
vice versa.
So that's where most people stop. And then they go, well, I guess we're screwed. But that's not actually the end of the story, which is where I think people are wrong. Because I read another article that was following up on this, and they said, you want to know what's actually doing, like, not bad at all right now in the industry? Like, they're really doing quite decently, is small presses, small press publishers. So there are a billion of these. Not all of them are successful. I know, like, Superversive Press shuttered, but Superversive Press had a lot of, I think, did a lot of things in a not ideal way, right? Like,
Mm,
is how I would describe it. But we have things like Tuscany Bay Press, off the top of my head. Castalia House is one of the most successful, right?
yep.
Castalia House is extremely successful. Uh, Atheon Press. There's tons and tons and tons. I'm not even going to go through all of them, right? Small press publishers, as they said, a lot of the problems with the big box publishers, first off, are no longer there. Number one, if they decide to publish you, that's a significant investment of resources on their part. They're going to push you, right? Like your books are going to be pushed. You're not a lottery ticket to them. You are what they like. You're their main product. Number two is that most authors, if they're going to make money of a significant kind, need a backlog of books, right? And traditional publishing doesn't publish a backlog of a failed author. If you don't sell in your first, few months, then you're just dead. You're a failed writer, right? But small presses don't look at it that way. They will try and push your backlog for as long as they can, right? And they will try and build up your audience over time if that's what it takes, because you're a significant resource investment for them. And the kicker here is, like, you can get into stores, you can get into libraries, like people think you can't, but this has been happening. The kicker here, though, is that they're not doing that bad, right? Like, they're actually doing fairly decently, to the point where you probably could make a modest career out of it. Now, will you be rich in the way that you get, like, the millionaire authors in Trad Pub? No, that will literally never happen. By design, it's not going to happen. Can you make a modest 50,000 a year through, if you are a successful small press author, right? Now, by a successful one, I mean, like, you're in the top percent of it, but then yes, potentially. However, I think there's some truth to what you said earlier, which is thinking of writing as a career in some ways is a mistake. Though I want to clarify here, I think there's a danger to this because the right tends to undervalue art, right? Like, it's a really big problem, actually, that Ben and I have been, like, on the forefront of kind of like, no, this stuff really matters. This is why people like Matt Walsh sometimes frustrate me, I think that Matt Walsh has done a lot of great things for the culture with What is a Woman in particular. However, his, like, basically he has, like, a very anti-art stance that I think is extremely counterproductive, and he's one of the leading conservative voices. I think that's a big problem. This idea, that, like, oh, writers, you can't really expect writers to earn a living. Well, no, we should be working to create a world where artists can earn a living, right? Like, skilled artists. I'm not saying everyone, it shouldn't be everyone, really, frankly, in any profession, right?
Yeah, but ideally, but writing has always been a slog. Like, we were talking about the other day, what, H.P. Lovecraft, the guy's a living, is a legend, had some fame in his own time. He didn't die exceptionally wealthy. Howard lived in his
No,
parents'
but there is a
house,
big difference here. They could make a living off of short story sales. That is literally impossible now. Even if you were the most successful short story writer in the world, if you were putting out a new short story every 2 weeks, you could not make, with, like, the highest paying magazines, you literally could not make a living off of short stories.
Yeah. Well,
Right?
now that they would be making TikToks, so it'd be the closest equivalent. You'd be like a huge TikTok channel or something. Like, it was short form content, but the era of the short story, yeah, it's just over. People just aren't into short stories, which is a tragedy. But
that's where it's like, I'm not willing to necessarily drop the fight here, right? Like, there's a difference between short stories you can't make a living off of them, and there's no room for short stories in art anymore, which I don't agree with. Some of the greatest fiction ever written has been short stories. One of the great writers of the 20th century, Flannery O'Connor, wrote 2 novels, but was primarily a short story writer. Edgar Allan Poe wrote 1 novel. He is arguably the most influential author, like, in the top 5 most influential authors ever, right? He was almost entirely a short story writer, wrote a single novel, right? So,
I think it's a marketing thing, though. I'm sorry, go ahead. But I was just gonna say, I think it's a marketing. It's a ease of transport thing that made the novel have a sort of preeminent place in our culture, and then sort of like backwards we become like, oh, the novel, that's the highest form of writing. And maybe in some ways it is, but it's this sort of, I agree that it's kind of silly, and that unless you're
I
a
think there's
novelist,
some
you're a great
truth to
writer.
it, right? Like, there is certainly a sort of ceiling on short stories and novels. Like, the greatest short story in the world is not going to be greater than the greatest novel in the world, right? It just won't be. You don't have the time to do what you can do with a novel. Now, granted, there are things in short fiction that you're trying to do that are different, but nevertheless, you simply cannot express as much about human nature, about, right, important topics in the limited scope of a short story that you can in a novel. So I get it to an extent. Right. I just think that it's sad that we seem to believe, in the modern day that like there isn't a place for it when I think that there absolutely should be. But even besides that, what I'm trying to get at is you're right. Writing has never been like a career that's been easy to make a living in. And I think we do need a mindset shift. So if I were to make like $5,000 a year off of my writing, that would be a huge help in my life. And I would consider myself fairly successful, right? Like $5,000 is not zero. I
Hmm.
could go on vacation. I could pay bills with that money, right? Like I could buy things with that. Like it's not no money. It's just not enough money to live on. Similarly, people are like, "Oh, I make, $20,000 a year. I can't live off of that." Well, no, you can't, but maybe you could pay rent, right? Like that's not an insignificant amount of money. $20,000. It's fairly significant. I think you're right in the current cultural climate that we're in. There is a point where we need to sort of accept that, like, maybe our ideas of success and failure are skewed. But on the flip side here, I don't want to entirely surrender on this because I think we need to create a world that values art.
Hmm. I agree. The challenge is, you know, we don't have okay, so how to get from A to B, right? You can get
Mhm.
patronage from an elite person, or you can generate some kind of, grassroots interest in it, in terms of like being paid as an author. Like those are like the two primary ways to do it. I guess the alternative would be to have someone that like fronts you the money up front and makes on the back end, which would be what traditional publishing would be. So those would be like the three models, right? um and the left gets patronage because they are the political power, and they have political powers of the beast behind them. So they have an easy source of patronage. And sorry to keep saying my podcast, we actually did an episode on this called the right wing artist, a case study in failure, based on an article by a guy named Cosmos Senix. Really good article he wrote in Man's World. And just talking about one of the main points of that being that you don't get any patronage from right wing sources if you're
Yeah.
genuinely like dissident in any way, and you're not just going to be writing. What was the was it Blaze or someone who did like that the Family Guy ripoff? This is kind of
Yeah.
reheated 1990s, early aughts
But it's
culture.
Adam Carolla, and I have no idea who Adam Carolla is. I have never known who that guy is. It's
Dang.
it's like maybe I'm missing out on something, but you know, it was very much like, no, this is stupid. This is always stupid. You wasted millions of dollars on something that won't succeed. But that's probably the point.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, dang, you're like the anti-boomer. Not no, I'm Corolla, dang dude. Look up Loveline sometime. He has some funny bits. If you're familiar with the meme of the fire alarm beat chirping, that's them. If you
Oh,
look up
really?
on YouTube, yeah, yeah, Loveline the chirp, or Loveline fire alarm chirping. There's like hilarious like best of thing. I just re-listened to recently for no particular reason. Um, and so I guess solution to try and get us from A to B, for my part, is just like trying to generate, I think doing stuff like you guys are doing and like we're doing and others, generate a little bit of interest and create I don't say echo chamber, but a place that's for listening into it, particularly for listening for that's from a reader perspective and not a writer perspective. Because I see a
Hmm.
lot of more on the Iron Age side. I'm not sure exactly where you guys fall on that, but there's the Iron Age side guys. There's a lot of like
They're allies.
authors interviewing authors about being authors, which I think is misguided. And my reasoning is like nobody wants to watch a clarinet player talk to a clarinet player about playing clarinet, right? So a writer, you should be presented to readers via the writing or some like derivative material from the writing. um And so I think creating more content that's about the end product, or that is a recomposition of the end product of these like creative things like writing or music or whatever, I think that's a valuable step. um I'm sure there's other stuff you can do, like getting more like larger social media influencers to maybe buy into it to levels that are safe.
Hmm.
And then obviously just trying to create good stuff to begin with and getting it out there, and then getting the eyeballs is always the hardest part. Trust me, I try sometimes too. um
I
and to me,
try.
I don't know, I think that's the only like realistic solution, is just to kind of trudge through and try and build this like subculture from the ground up. Because I don't think there's gonna be any patronage, and I don't like maybe people are doing what is it? Is it Athon or Atheon Publishing? Like those guys, I know a guy who's really into them, and he's always saying that they have like a really good business model of kind of identifying rising stars on like micro blogging sites and things like that, and then they kind of bring them in house and then put their stuff out through them. Like maybe something like that is what we need, like some kind of curator publisher. um
Yeah. We've
so,
come to similar conclusions ourselves, which is what, our High Tower project, which will come out in about 2 weeks on the 14th, is about, finding bespoke short stories and whatnot. And, for my part anyway, there's always a lot of gatekeeping to do. Uh, because last thing we need is to lose another publishing house to Convergence or something similar.
mhm.
Um, there's it's a very complicated issue, and I think we've only just scratched the surface. But your curation is something that I've heard from many other people. The question is how to do it and how to. Um, so I'm sure you've seen Ratatouille.
Actually haven't.
No,
Yeah, I'm aware of it.
Oh,
I know it from memes. That's
get
it.
out, get it. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Sir, you can just leave, and then when you watch it, you can come back. Uh, so there, Anton Ego, the critic.
Mhm.
He's the gatekeeper of the Parisian restaurants. He can literally destroy, men and their works. Like Zeus casting down Kronos. Um, and but the thing is that like the way to get there is through immense quality, and to demonstrate time and time again that you know what you're talking about, which is a lot more difficult than I think people understand, because not only do you have to have a very strong idea as to what good literature is, you also have to be a supreme dick about it. It's but in a way that people find charismatic and are drawn to you, which, uh, you know, isn't isn't an easy thing.
Mhm.
It's we are at an hour. How do you feel?
I'm gonna go more. I know Anthony, you might have a hard stop in a bit here.
yeah, I'm
Um,
gonna leave it like 10, 15 ish.
yeah, I had one more thought, and then if you guys don't want to wrap, I'm good with it. Or if you want to go
No, no,
for a
no.
few more, I'm
Well,
good. But
this is even though we're talking as much as you are, we're sort of looking to you and looking to see what you bring up, so we can talk about it.
yeah, for sure. I guess on the curation point, the one thing I want to bring up was I don't think we have it, partly because of social media. And this is actually something in that episode I referenced just now about the distant artist, like case study and failure, we talked about a lot, is
Hmm.
in the internet landscape, as opposed to the magazine, I'm the New York Times, who's the best, where to eat in New York editor. I'm the guy that writes the column. We don't have that top down authoritarian control.
Yeah.
No one, not many do, unless you're really at the peaks of quote unquote influence. And
Influence.
so the dynamic is actually really perverted to always give positive reviews to people that have the social media following,
Mm.
and or even if they don't, and just to get positive reviews or like very generic reviews. I don't know, I've seen it a lot in the indie writing space, and it's something I consciously try to, thanks to my natural high disagreeableness.
Yay, high
um
disagreeableness. Yay.
yeah, let's go, bros. And like my co-host, we always push back, and I think in a very kind way, because the opposite is being like inflammatory, like I get clicks by being so taking a piss on everything. But the default from what everything I see on places like Twitter, and I'm sure it's the same on Facebook and elsewhere, is you buddy with writers and anyone that can give you stuff, and you don't give that harsh critique, and
Mm.
no one has that level of control to be the Parisian tastemaker because of that, except in very rare instances.
Right.
So anyway, that's why I see that hasn't happened yet, and I think there's a lot of good people that try to push back against it, but we're kind of swimming upstream, and I don't have an easy solution to it besides just, everyone try to be a little more honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's my bummer conclusion.
It's it is difficult because like you have to balance out the fact that yeah, high disagreeableness. Somebody looks at Pinkerton's Ghost and goes, "This is the worst horror I've ever seen in my life." Well, f you, buddy. It's a fight response in different ways that a leftist would essentially bow down to if the tastemaker has sufficient social clout. It's the same thing that makes us, bastions of quality, is the same thing that prevents us from being, able to unite as well as the left is. Um, it's hard to do that. Like if someone comes up to me, it's like, Ben, how many units have you sold? Well, I haven't really sold that much. So why are you saying that Glorbo 7, the weird centaur love series by XYZ famous author is terrible? Well, it's terrible because he used to write cool ass monster science fiction or whatever, and now he's writing about centaurs falling in love. It's terrible. It's been terrible. But you don't have a million
Mhm.
sales, do you? I don't need a
Mhm.
million sales. But it's hard to get over that
Mhm.
once until you have that tastemaker power. I like
Yeah.
calling it that, by the way. Now I'll be referring to it as tastemaker power.
I want to be a tastemaker. It's my dream job.
Yep. Tell me it's terrible harder. No, I'm kidding. It's
Mm.
yeah, it's difficult though. I think Man's World has done a great job, by the way.
Hmm.
Not necessarily as tastemakers, and I don't think they'd really accept that if you called them that. Um, but just in the product that they're producing, I think Man's World may be a model for things to come. Uh,
Hmm.
but it's hard
I
for me
agree.
to quantify that at this time.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's kind of made the leap, and it had the major and the guy who's behind it, Ren.
Mm,
He started with the presence. He had an online presence, and then he converted into a contributor and also largely himself run thing. And then now through passive publishing, it's got like an actual in print physical, but also they can monetize it and get.
mm.
Actually, I have a physical copy. It's very
So
beautiful.
do I. It's great.
Um, yeah, and you know, yeah, great. I think you're right. I think that is probably the model to look at in terms of the way they branded themselves. Not
Mm.
not that you have to have that exact branding. We don't need a million,
They're very gonzo.
bodybuilding, yeah, Gonzo style. Um, but yeah, they definitely did it really well.
Yeah, yeah. And I think yeah, it's just one of those things where it's like trying to talk about something that'll come in the future more than likely, but won't mm, but like won't be influential until it's influential, I
Mm,
guess is the way to put it. Uh, hopefully, things change. But for now, that's just how I see it. Don't get me wrong. The part of the reason why I'm open in this conversation to you about it is so that people get some ideas. Uh, and
Yeah, exactly.
even
And like I said, aim small, right? Like take
yeah,
stabs. Don't expect to necessarily make a fortune. But yeah, do stuff you're proud of and promote and just engage with it as a culture. That's the other thing. I see a lot of people that they throw their writing out there. They don't read others. Not
hmm
that you need to be reading assignments, but just it, the phrase I keep coming back to is a living culture. Try to create, embrace, engage with a
yep,
living culture, as opposed to something that's purely like quote unquote political, capital P political,
hmm
or which again is another aspect of why I think this is so healthy. Because I see a lot of people, maybe it's because of where I am, but I see a lot of people plugging in less to the outrage based, you know, dopamine addiction shit
oh yeah,
and more into what I see. This is like slow culture. This is like people trying to return to like a more meaningful, slower culture, and not,
bait culture.
you know, yeah, bait. That's the perfect word for it.
Yeah, and I've like one of the things, as I sift the meme sphere, reaching out to see what ideas are floating in the new sphere of mankind on the internet, people are saying there's a change happening. Something's changing. And it's not just like the political outrage of the day. Quite frankly, if this stuff had happened to, Donald Trump, if it had happened like 5 years ago, 8 years ago, it would have been all anyone talks about. But now even the memes are starting to die away.
Mhm.
So things are happening faster, and also people are like, okay, this is just business as usual. Let's go back to what's actually important. You know, there's a few streams about it. The political commentator stream about it, of course, which is to be expected. Razor
Mhm.
Fist did a absolutely 10 out of 10 one. Uh, Surprised it's still on YouTube. It was 10 out of 10, let me tell you. Uh, so it's like appropriate channels and streams of thought were no longer bursting out of their boundaries into things like literature, into things like gaming and stuff like that, which, we talked about Sad Puppies before the show, which was a part of Sad Puppies. The politics sort of bursting its stream into, literary circles to the detriment of the Hugos. So it's I think something's changing, and I think pretty soon, there'll be plenty of tigers to ride.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah, I agree. This is it's a time to lay the seed now. I think.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, gentlemen, but I do need to go. I wake up at 5 in the morning.
God bless you.
Fun, fun, fun.
All good. I think I'm good too. I think we've solved it. I think we saved the West.
Yeah, we did. Good job, guys. When we wake up in the morning, everything
I don't
will
know
be
why they think it's
reversed.
hard. People act like it's so difficult.
I know, right? These people. Uh, anyway, do you have any final words for us, David?
No, no, I just hugely appreciate you guys having me on. We'll have to get you guys on at some point. Think of a good topic because we like to our new thing. We try to have topic based episodes, kind of like what you guys have been doing. And we'll have to keep an eye out and find an excuse to get together again.
Absolutely. We'll look forward to it. We want to thank our loyal listeners and anyone who came in through Tookie's Mag, YouTube, and Twitter. Do check us out. Do check out Tookie's Mag. Like David said, now's the time to lay seeds. Now's the time to find friends. We're in it for the long haul, and we've survived worse droughts than anyone can than we've publicly talked about.
Mhm.
So don't you worry about us in the coming future. Don't you worry about us at all. Thank you, and have a good